Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our November webinar. I think you are in for a treat tonight. We are talking about tonight health and diet. We know a healthy diet improves obesity, helps you control heart disease, including hypertension, decreases diabetes and cancer. These are some statistics you may not be aware of. 3 out of 4 infants are not breastfed, and we know the benefits related to health with breastfeeding. 9 out of 10 Americans consume too much sodium. 1/6 of pregnant women have low iron levels, and we spend 173 billion with a B per year to treat obesity. A recent study was published that showed that improving your diet at any age helps to extend your life. That is simply decreasing processed foods, decreasing salt, decreasing sugar, increasing your fruits and vegetables, nuts, lentils, seafood, and whole grains makes a difference. Small changes give you big benefits. The New England Journal of Medicine followed 74,000 people aged 35 to 75 for 20 years, and they followed what we call a healthy eating index. And they showed simply by changing that index by 20% decreased your risk of mortality by 8%. And that was at any age. So I encourage you tonight to think about what simple changes can you make in your diet to make a difference for your life. And you're in for a treat tonight with our speaker. I am going to share my screen and bring you greetings on behalf of the Delta Research and Educational Foundation. So thank you all very much again for joining us this evening. My name is Yvonne Collins, and I am the Chicago Citywide Coordinator for the Delta Research and Education Foundation. Research Matters for All of Us. This is our staff that work diligently each and every day to make sure that we fulfill our duties and responsibilities as grantees of the National Institute of Health. These are the 12 wonderful cities that were chosen to do exactly what we're doing tonight, and that is really to engage and educate the community so that we can make a difference in health outcomes and healthcare disparities. Our campaign objectives are simple. They are to create awareness, to encourage health and wellness, and our focus happens to be the African American community.
So much of what we've done in medicine over the years has not really taken into account individual differences, and this is an opportunity to be part of something historic.
Most studies and most clinical trials have always been with the average white male. So as we start thinking about this we get back that trust by involving the community. Not saying you come to us or we'll just do things to you. We're going to do things with you and in fact allow that information to be accessible to you, the individual.
You're going to have some individuals that are going to say, yes, good, we're getting in on the ground level of a study. And then you're going to have those that have some trepidations about it. My thing is to bring them aboard and let them know that this is for the greater good for them. We have input, and without input, there's no buy-in. And without buy-in, there's no commitment. Without commitment, there's no success.
Tuskegee happened. We're not trying to hide that or sweep it under the rug, but communities of color will be at a disadvantage if we do not find ways to get by that, whether the focus is asthma, whether the focus is infant mortality, whether the focus is diabetes, cancer or heart disease. Communities of color are disproportionately impacted by them.
It has always been playing catch-up to make sure that they're even getting access, much less minimum service. Low income, underserved, and people of color are oftentimes very generous in giving something if they understand it. And they always do so with the intention that knowing this is not just about me, this is not just even about my family, it is about helping the community down the road.
Being able to bring the Asian American population who is never at the table, not only to contribute to science, but to contribute to our ability to understand the nuances within those populations. I think it will provide a huge national data set so we can ask questions and make discoveries about healthcare that will better their own personal health and those of the communities that they are part of.
Diversity strengthens the science. It could bridge some civil rights issues and inequities in healthcare across all races and ethnicities and culture.
As a community of color, underrepresented, hidden, underserved, what would happen if you were not at the table? It is an issue of equity, and it's an issue of justice as well.
It is important for minorities to be a part of this, or we will again be left with medications that are created for really other populations. I'm hopeful that we will be overwhelmed with folk.
So the NIH All of Us research program is really a huge endeavor. The aim, as I said earlier, is to improve healthcare outcomes and decrease healthcare disparities. But it's going to be the catalyst for that is going to be prevention and treatment and precision medicine. As an oncologist over my 23 years, I've seen the change in how we treat cancers. We can now get to the very level of the genetics of the tumor and provide medications that are very specific for that patient. Just imagine if we could do that with every single disease.
Something called precision medicine, in some cases people call it personalized medicine, gives us one of the greatest opportunities for new medical breakthroughs that we have ever seen. Doctors have always recognized that every patient is unique, and doctors have always tried to tailor their treatments as best they can to individuals. You can match a blood transfusion to a blood type. That was an important discovery. What if matching a cancer cure to our genetic code was just as easy, just as standard? What if figuring out the right dose of medicine was as simple as taking our temperature? And that's the promise of precision medicine, delivering the right treatments at the right time, every time, to the right person.
And so our mission and objectives are to accelerate research, to build relationships, to create an ecosystem, but really to deliver the largest and richest biomedical resource that we have ever seen. The core values are very simple. It's open to anyone who wants to participate. We're encouraging diversity. That's why our focus is African Americans. Some others are focusing on the Asian population, the Latinx population, seniors, but all of those folks that are not normally in clinical trials. We want to be transparent. We want you to know exactly what's going to happen at every point and every step of the process. We want it to be accessed broadly. We want it to be secure and private. And we want to be able to see that positive change, which we're starting to see. I'm going to skip this slide because Maria will go over it later, but it's really just the process. The process is really easy. Partner. So imagine the questions we could answer with research. Are there better pain medications that aren't addictive? Do we have a way of diagnosing diabetes before people develop neuropathy and nephropathy? Can we develop strategies for dementia to even stop the progression? Those are all of the questions potentially that we will answer with this clinical
The All of Us
research.
research program is an ambitious effort to gather health information from 1 million or more people across the U.S. Researchers will be able to use this information to uncover new, more precise ways to prevent and treat disease and to keep people healthy.
If we delve deeper into where we live, what we consume, what we do, that will have an impact on trying to prevent diseases in the future.
Precision medicine will allow us to get the right medicine at the right time for the right person.
Diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, illnesses that Black women get and die from needs to be researched.
This isn't going to be some sort of Tuskegee experiment. This is going to be the community working together with healthcare institutions.
And so the promise for those who participate with us is that we'll fight disease together. Our participants and partners will be able to learn more about their own health and new innovative ways to treat it. They'll have access to all of their own data. So I encourage you, if you want to learn more, to go to researchallofus.org and get more information. I am delighted today to welcome our healthcare partner today. As you can see on the screen, All of Us encompasses an array of institutions. Today we have Maria Garcia. She has a background in communications, advertising, and second language acquisition. She recently joined Northwestern as a research study coordinator, and her goal is really to work to meet the goals of the program through communication, partnerships, and enrollment. So thank you very much, Maria, for joining us tonight, and I will turn it over to you. Just let me know when you want me to advance the slides.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction to the All of Us research program, Dr. Collins. And hello, everyone. My name is Maria, and like Dr. Collins mentioned, I'm a research study coordinator senior with the All of Us research program at Northwestern. And I'm thrilled to be with the program. I really believe in our mission and our goals on a deep personal level, and I am thrilled to be here tonight. So I'm very thankful that you have taken time off your day to be with us and to learn more about the All of Us research program. I'm going to do a brief presentation in which I'm going to be sharing a few more details on how to sign up for the program, as well as what you could expect throughout the process and throughout the participant journey, and what our numbers look like today in our program, since we are already in year 5 of it, of the 10 years that the program is expected to go for or longer. So if you could advance this, no, sorry. So as you can see here in this slide, sorry, the previous one. My bad, I'm slightly nervous because I'm really excited to be here.
Take your time.
For that. So on the previous slide, we could see several institutions that work in this effort, and together were known as the Illinois Precision Medicine Consortium, or IPMC. And you can see a concise view of our participant locations throughout Illinois. We are spread out, so you can choose a location that's conveniently located close to you. That's a very important thing to us, that our participants are always comfortable participating at any stage of the participant journey. And even if you don't receive care at one of these health provider organizations, you can still choose any of those locations. You don't need to be a participant, a patient to be a participant of the program. And I would also like to note that in response to COVID-19, we have now resumed in-person visit at all of our centers, but we are still offering remote participation if that's something our participants feel more comfortable with, because like I said, the comfort of our participants is a priority to us. Now, if you could go to the next slide. So the participation in the program, what does it actually look like? What do I mean when I say that we might offer remote alternatives? So the participation is made up of both an online person and an in-person portion. There's just one in-person appointment that would take place, and everything else would be online. And what this means is that either through a smartphone with our All of Us application, or through the website joinallofus.org/Illinois, you can create an account. And in this account, which is also known as the participant portal or the digital dashboard for the participant journey, you will be able to access consents and surveys that will take place. We do encourage all participants to complete the online portion before an in-person appointment to decrease the amount of time that they spend in our centers. But this is not required, and if they do not have access to a smartphone or an internet, the online portion can be completed at any of our participant centers when they come in person, or we also offer telephone appointments to help patients through these first stages, whether that's creating an account, sorry about the noises, whether that's creating an account or helping them through any questions that they might have, the first steps, or the surveys. After that, participants are going to be able to view activity and data shared within the participant portal at any time they might choose to. And when they come into one of our participant centers, what they can expect is that if the online portion has not already been completed, we will be helping them. We'll put them in a consent room with privacy so they can read through it. And they will be asked to consent to the program if they want to continue, and create the account with an email or a mobile phone number. The consent process is an interactive journey that includes screens and videos explaining the program and participant rights, including available transcripts if they need so, consenting documents that need to be read and signed by the participant, and all of these consents can be accessed and updated at any time by the participant's phone. If they choose to consent to share their electronic health records, which is the second consent that we do after choosing to participate, they will be asked to provide a witness signature. That is simply somebody over the age of 18 who can confirm that they are who they say they are. And this witness can be one of our staff members if the participant lives alone, or if they prefer to do this on site. After this participant has been completed, there's a third consent in case the participant would like to take part in our DNA study and obtain those results. And then they will be asked to complete a series of surveys. Surveys completion is what will provide researchers with an understanding of life and environment that might affect the participant, like how they exercise and what they eat, which, as Dr. Collins was mentioning, is incredibly important in someone's overall health. And these surveys are also an important part of staying connected with participants and hearing about the changes that they might experience in their life over time and how this might play a part in their health. Once this has been completed, participants will be given a list of nearby sites which they can partner with, the ones that we were showing on a previous slide. And after selecting the desired location, they will then have the opportunity to schedule an in-person visit. This in-person visit will take about 30 to 45 minutes and will include, we'll take basic physical measurements such as height, weight, hip and waist circumference, and blood pressure. It is sort of like a mini physical that we'll perform. And we will also be collecting biosamples. That'll be either blood or saliva and urine. This blood or saliva will be, amongst other things that will be stored for, it'll be what we will use for this DNA testing and ancestry testing that we are currently offering. And lastly, participants can also answer SNAP questions on their participant portal and even sync and view data from supported third-party apps such as Fitbit and Apple Health, because everything serves as additional sources of data collection to understand health in a more comprehensive and overall manner. And because the All of Us research program is a longitudinal study, there is a large value in receiving multiple data points for participants over time to have a full understanding of the various factors that make their health story, because what might for one person, it is very different from what might work for somebody else or where they are in their health journey. So what information is going to be shared with participants? If Dr. Collins, if you don't mind going to the next slide. So as I was mentioning earlier, we're currently offering DNA testing, and as part of our core values, the All of Us research program is committed to ensuring that participants have the chosen ability to share information, but also to receive information. Like Dr. Collins was mentioning earlier, that it is important that for us, the participants also have an understanding of their own health. In this case, as I was mentioning, many participants have expressed a strong desire to understand what DNA can tell them about their health. So currently, the first DNA results that participants are obtaining are ancestry and non-related trait reports. If participants consent to receiving them during these three first consents that they go through, they will have access to these trait and ancestry results separately, and they can always decide what they want to see and what they want to receive. If they don't want to receive them, that's perfectly understandable as well, and they don't have to do so. The participant's comfort is always a priority. And then they will be receiving a DNA health-related report. We just started giving back these reports to our first participants, the ones that first started with the program, and we are slowly ramping up, so every participant in time will get their results. These reports include, like I mentioned, the genetic ancestry and traits, but also hereditary disease risk and how their genetics may impact how their bodies react to some medicines. The hereditary disease risk report will provide information on health conditions that are associated with a specific set of genes, but the All of Us research program is not reporting on all genes or all hereditary health conditions. What we are currently doing is reporting on genes and the associated conditions that there's currently prevention and treatment options for. So participants can make decisions about their own health with this information on their hands. And once they receive the results, they will also, through a web-based genetic engagement module, they can easily navigate and view these results. Like I said, the traits, the ancestry, and the health-related ones. And they will also have access to educational materials regarding these results, live phone support, and escalation to something that's the genetic counseling resource. This genetic counseling resource, besides offering live phone support and the educational materials, offers them to be connected with local resources that could work for them, and they will help them facilitate discussions with loved ones and family members about these reports, if they choose to do so, if they choose to share it, and if they want to take part of that. If you want to go to the next slide. As I mentioned, it is very important that our participants are comfortable and safe. So safety is also something that's our top priority. During our visits, we ask participants to wear a mask that can be provided by the hospital. For example, here at Northwestern, at every entrance, masks are provided, and I know that the rest of our partners do so as well. And there will be 2 health screening check-ins, one the days prior to the appointment and another one during the check-in. If at any point the participant needs to reschedule, we will facilitate them that option. We also have a car service, called Case and Health, and they partner with Lyft and Uber to have dedicated drivers for medical appointments. So if a participant needs assistance getting to their appointment, they will be able to schedule a ride to and from the center. They will also return them back home so they can come to their visit and have as much ease and as much access as they need. This is provided for every participant, including electric wheelchairs and people that will feel more comfortable if the driver gets them into the hospital or up to the floor. If a participant prefers to drive, we cover the cost of parking in our garages. And if a participant chooses to use public transport, we also give them a Ventra card that's useful for 24 hours. So at any point, we make sure that participants can get to us and that it is not a hassle for them to get to us, that they're as comfortable as possible participating. And once they arrive, one of our staff members will meet them at the check-in so they don't have to worry about getting lost. And for certain languages, for example, we also offer somebody that speaks the language to be in person. For example, I'm fluent in Spanish. I'm from Spain. So every time that somebody that's Spanish-speaking participant comes in, I will be with them from the first moment that they get out of the elevator until the moment they get back into the elevator. And if they need help getting into their car, getting into the garage, or even going to the lift, I will help them with that as well, and through every part of the visit. And it is also important that our participant centers have implemented policies and procedures to meet all local, state, and federal guidelines. So they may vary slightly by site or location, but they include universal masking and physical distancing, self-reporting of any health symptoms in the days prior to appointments, and additional health screenings upon checking in. Next slide, please. And lastly, before I give back to Dr. Collins, this is something that one of my favorite slides. It talks about where we're at on year 5. Our aim is to enroll 1 million or more participants. And in the middle of the program, we're over the middle of that goal. So currently we have 550,455 participants that have consented to be part of the program, and 46,038 of those are located in Illinois. Of those that have completed the initial consent to participate in the program, 387,249 have completed every single action that there is to complete up until this point, which is the 3 initial consents, the surveys, which I believe there's 6 currently at the time, and the in-person appointment. And 39,470 of those are in Illinois, which is a great number if you compare both of them. And one of the things that Dr. Collins mentioned that it is incredibly important to us is to bring underrepresented communities into research. So currently The All of Us research program defines populations that are underrepresented in biomedical research as groups historically not well represented in biomedical research, including clinical trials. Currently, over 80% of our participants belong to one of those categories. In Illinois, we even surpassed the national average because we're at past 86%. And of those populations and groups, 67.86% belong to a racial minority. And of those researchers that have been cleared and approved to use our databases and help with medical breakthroughs and advancing healthcare and healthcare, we have currently 431 registered institutions and 3,655 registered researchers that can access this database and that have been cleared to do so. These numbers keep growing every single week, and we cannot be prouder of the work that we have on our hands, but also very thankful for every single person of these 550,455% that have taken time out of their days to give to the community. So if you go to the next slide, this is it for me. If you have any questions for me regarding how to join, if you're interested in learning more about participation or the program or what we do or what can be expected, you can always feel free to contact us using this link, journalofus.org/Illinois, or I'm also going to drop my email and our phone on the chat. The email will be directly to me. The phone is the one that we have here at Northwestern for the research program. So I want to thank you everyone for your time, for listening to me. And thank you so much, Dr. Collins, for giving me the time. I'll hand it back to you now.
Thank you so much, Maria. We couldn't do it without our healthcare partner organizations. So again, if you want additional information, you can use any of our social media platforms that are all listed here. But again, join allofus.org/DREF. Again, if you have questions, you want to have programming with us, you can always reach out directly to me. That is my email address. And I think most of you have that information. Before we bring on the main event, I'd like to read this disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed by the guest panelists and/or presenters do not reflect the views or opinions of the Delta Research and Educational Foundation, DREF. DREF Research Matters for All of Us, the NIH All of Us Research Program, or any of these organization affiliates. I have the honor today of presenting our guest speaker, Dr. Tony Hampton, who is board certified in family obesity medicine and also holds a master's in nutritional and functional medicine. He's the previous medical director at Advocate, where he collaborated on multiple social risk factors, including healthy living, diabetes prevention programs, in addition to the food pharmacy, getting really fresh fruits and vegetables to those who need it most. He now serves as the regional medical director in the South region, which encompasses Chicago. You can also see he's an author. That's his book on the screen, Fix Your Diet, Fix Your Diabetes. Not only is he a fantastic doctor and an author and a blogger and an educator, he is a graduate of Xavier University. So Dr. Hampton, if you want, I'm going to stop sharing. If you take the screen and share your deck, we can get started with your presentation. Again, if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat and we will answer them at the end.
Well,
and everybody can see Dr. Hampton's busy desktop.
You had to throw that in. That's beautiful. And I've been accused of having a busy desktop, and I appreciate you. And I just want to celebrate all the service you gave to our organization as well. It looks like I'm not visible. Let me do that first. So really appreciate that. And is it gonna let me show my face here? Yeah, there it is. Okay. So, and also, as I was listening to the jazz you were playing, you may recall at Xavier, I had a good friend, Dobbin Bookman, and appropriately named Bookman because it was him who allowed me to study with him. And he was probably the smartest male student at the school. And it was that jazz that we listened to that allowed me to, become a better student. So I had a little flashback. You also mentioned in your earlier comments about the importance of using genetics. I literally just had a conversation or presentation with RISE Population Health earlier today, where I mentioned polygenic risk scores, which allows for us to use our genes to determine our risk for chronic medical conditions. So none of these tests, in my opinion, will replace the totality of things we have to evaluate, but it'll just be one additional tool in our toolkit. So I'm happy that we're starting to use our genes to reflect our risk. So when you look at the first slide, it comments on credentials. I wanted to just mention two of them, which was the obesity, the ABOM, which is obesity, and the master's in human nutrition and functional medicine. And that's really important because doctors, clinicians in general, don't get a lot of training in obesity medicine, and they definitely don't get a lot of training in nutrition. So I had to leave my traditional training just for a moment to learn how to use food as medicine. And I really think that's important. For anybody who's intrigued by the conversation today, please go to my, just Dr. Tony Hampton Linktree. You can just Google that. But I think that's important because I do speak slightly differently than my conventional training. And that's really how I've been able to help people heal from these chronic medical conditions. So let's kind of get started. The first slide I like to share is the one that basically shares a statistical reality based on this Tufts University study. And it found that only 7% of Americans are metabolically healthy. And that's a huge problem because that means 93% are not metabolically healthy. And that's why I call myself the metabolic health doc, because I feel like if that's true, then it's really important that we focus on what's going to give us the most return on investment. And I believe that focusing on metabolic health is an example. For those who need to be reminded, I know everybody on the call is not a clinician. This is what metabolic health measures look like. And if you have 3 out of 5 of these not in the normal range, the most important is your waist circumference. So if you take a gentleman who has a large belly and you contrast him with a woman who is very large, but yet she has maybe a pear shape instead of an apple shaped. She has more hips. She will have a way lower risk for heart disease than that male. So the abdominal adiposity, that's how we describe it in medicine, is more important than the overall weight. So that's just something you need to be aware of. All of these measures are important, but I want you to also notice there's no total cholesterol and there's no LDL cholesterol. So a lot of times all of our focus is on what's your cholesterol? Well, unless you take the cholesterol and break it down into small particles and or large particles, the small are the ones that cause the most harm. It really doesn't give you a really good prediction of your risk for heart disease. So that's the first aha moment I had, which is we're putting all this energy into our LDL cholesterol, and yet it is a poor predictor of poor metabolic health. So it's just something to keep in mind. Better predictors are your blood pressure and your insulin, your fasting insulin level. So let's go to the conditions that make me want to focus on metabolic health. And as you can see, many of the conditions that harm our friends and family, including the blood pressure, the risk for dementia, and cancer, all of those are things that we need to be concerned about. Cancer cells love sugar as fuel. Dementia is also called type 3 diabetes. And so if you could figure out how to deal with metabolic syndrome, you will reverse or prevent the number 1 cause of death, heart disease. You will reduce the risk for cancer, which is the number 2. The number 3 is probably stroke. You'll reduce that risk, even though it's not on the slide. And of course, dementia is high on the list, and that's very familiar in my family. So one of the nuggets that you want to walk away from, if you have not heard this before, is that if you want to predict future diabetes, and again, these are all metabolic conditions, then you may want to consider looking at this this insulin level. And if you notice, the insulin level rises before you become borderline diabetic. Before you become diabetic. So wouldn't it make sense that in our country, we would get a fasting insulin level on all the patients who come in for a checkup, right? So, and guess what? You can then use that information to then say, hey, diabetes is on its way. Now, why would the insulin level go up before you get diabetes? It goes up because it's trying to keep your blood sugar normal. Sugar is so toxic that your pancreas will work overtime to keep your blood sugar level at a normal level. And just in case you didn't get the memo, you only have 1 teaspoon of sugar in your blood at this moment. Think about that. So if you only have 1 teaspoon of sugar in if you go just to 2 teaspoons, your body freaks out. So, but we don't want to overburden the pancreas. And we'll share in a moment what things will overburden the pancreas and make you more prone to insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, where you're making too much insulin, and then metabolic syndrome. So I wanted to put this in front of you to say 2 things. One is a low-carb diet and a low-fat diet both improve your overall health compared to the standard American diet. If your objective, and this is from my obesity training, if your objective is to lose weight and you want to look at randomized controlled trials, it is no question that for significantly greater weight loss, you may do better with a low-carb diet. If you're on a low-fat, vegan, vegetarian diet and you're being successful, I suggest you continue with that. But I just want to be clear that that's something that you need to know based on the evidence. And it's pretty striking when you compare the two. So I want to use hypertension as an example of metabolic health and diet because hypertension is so prevalent in our society. And there was a time when I and Dr. Collins first got trained, it was always 140/90 or less. And now they're kind of lowering that a little bit to where you really start to worry at lower numbers, and that's the 130/80. And you could imagine how many more people, particularly in communities of color, are now considered having elevated or hypertensive blood pressure. And if we have relatives that we think about in the South, you could imagine that a lot of those relatives live where it's red on this map. And, you know, rather it's Mississippi, Alabama, and we know we love that food. Me and Dr. Collins went to Xavier and they had some of the best food on the planet, but they also have a high incidence of hypertension. And so it's important that we recognize that. It looks like California is doing okay. Looks like some of the states towards the West are doing okay, but we certainly need to work on that in the South. So 670,000, look at that stat, right? That's a lot of folk who are succumbing to hypertension related deaths. And that's a problem. So, and when you think about this stat, you can't believe it, but nearly half of adults in the United States have hypertension. That's pretty amazing and really unfortunate because in my opinion, high blood pressure is reversible and preventable. Even when you have genetic predispositions, is the other things that you have to do. So let's look at what the American Heart Association would say. They would say that what you need to do is reduce your sodium because, you know, and it's a pretty logical argument because if you put salt in your body, it's going to attract water. And if that occurs, you're going to increase the volume of blood in your arteries. So if you have damaged, stiff arteries, it's going to increase your blood pressure. Very logical statement. I'm not mad at the American Heart Association for that statement. But this graph is the graph that I really want to highlight and why that may be a little misguided, although I understand it. So if we go to what we traditionally do in conventional medicine, we focus on the absorption of salt in our kidneys. So that's that renal sodium reabsorption, right? And of course, if you do that, that's going to increase your risk for hypertension, and that increased blood volume eventually will irritate the arteries leading to cardiovascular disease. But what we miss and what I've learned in my functional medicine training is that what is the root cause of why you have hypertension in the first place, right? And what I would argue, it goes back to hyperinsulinemia. And hyperinsulinemia, making too much insulin because you're eating the things that require insulin, is the more of a root cause of why we have a blood pressure problem. So if you go to the top, you probably are not going to be able to change your genetics, at least in terms of who your mom and daddy was. Although epigenetics would suggest your environment can impact your genetics. Those on high dose insulin may need to be on high dose insulin until they stop eating the foods that require insulin. And then, but the overnutrition, that's the part that we overlook. And if we eat too many foods that raise our insulin, that would be processed grains and in some cases, non-processed grains. Things like starchy foods, and of course, sugar itself. Those are the things that lead to hyperinsulinemia, which not only causes the absorption of salt, but it makes your calcium influx greater, causing your arteries to constrict. Endothelial dysfunction. Did you know that the blood vessels that are in, the cells lining your artery, they are the ones that make nitric oxide, right? And nitroglycerin is what we give people when they're having chest pain to open their artery. So imagine hyperinsulinemia actually damages the endothelium, and guess what? You're going to stop making the nitric oxide, causing constriction. We need to have an arrow that's pointing from endothelial to vasoconstriction. And then, of course, macrophages. You already know that too much insulin causes inflammation. Too much sugar causes inflammation. Macrophages kick in, and that leads to stiff arteries and hypertension. And of course, if you make too much insulin, just like the alcoholic who drinks too much alcohol, you become tolerant. And we use the term alcohol resistance, insulin resistance, the same thing. And when you become insulin resistant, going back to that endothelial nitric oxide, that's going to cause vasoconstriction. So through multiple mechanisms, hyperinsulinemia is the root cause of hypertension and cardiovascular disease. And until we have a fundamental shift in how we treat patients, we're going to struggle. And I'll be honest with you, in the 19 years I was a clinician, while Dr. Collins was in our health system, I took hardly anybody, probably a couple of people in 19 years, off of medication. I've been focused on lifestyle changes for about 10 years. And in the 10 years that I've been focused on lifestyle changes, it's completely flipped. In fact, not this past Saturday, but the Saturday before, the first Saturday of the month, I saw probably 15 patients, 8 of whom had weight loss stories to celebrate, and 2 of which got off medicines. So I took 2 people off medicines in one day, and I hadn't taken but 2 people off medicines in 19 years. So if we focus on just salt, you're going to miss the big picture, and you're going to find that that's not going to get the answers and the results you care about. Now, let's talk a little bit about why I'm a low-carb doctor primarily, although I do have vegans and carnivores alike in my practice. Because if you look at this graph, if you're concerned about hyperinsulinemia, and pardon my father-in-law, but hyperinsulinemia is triggered by too many carbs. As you can see, this graph makes it very clear. When you eat starchy, sugary foods, you're going to end up with a spike in your glucose. When that occurs, just like when you eat the rice and Chinese food, it's going to spike. And when that spike occurs, you're going to make insulin, then it's going to go down. So what's going to happen is you're on a roller coaster going up and down, up and down. And that's why you get hangry. You're hungry and angry because you're always wanting to graze like a cow. If you ate an egg omelet in the morning, as an example, which has fat and protein, it'll be a nice gradual rise. I mean, it won't be high, and it'll satiate you. So this is why your diet is fundamental if you're diabetic. And as you have seen, not just diabetes, dementia and hypertension and cancer, all of those things can't deal with all these insulin spikes. And by the way, if you hadn't heard, insulin is the fat storage hormone. So every time you spike, you're going to either store that extra, glucose as fat. You're going to store it as glycogen in your muscle and in your liver, or you're going to use it for fuel. So ultimately, you don't want to keep having those spikes. So here's an example, and I always use brown rice because people think with the fiber, brown rice makes sense. People will also say, well, in China, they eat rice. What's the big deal? Well, in America, some of our Chinese brothers and sisters are not thin because they also eat the standard American diet with the rice. So when you combine not moving around, maybe having more stress and all the other factors that occur in the United States, you're going to find that people who have issues with carbs don't tolerate them very well. So if I'm a diabetic, why would I eat 45 carbs of anything divided by 4 is the equivalent of 11 teaspoons of sugar. So that's your equation, guys. Divide the carbs by 4 to get the teaspoons of sugar equivalent. So why would I eat that when I can eat cauliflower rice, which is only 4 carbs, which is 1 teaspoon of sugar? Here's another example. And who doesn't like smothered potatoes with some onions, right? I know I did, but I don't really eat it often because now I understand the numbers. And by the way, you have 38 carbs in soda and you have 37. So you have just as much sugar in a potato as you have in soda, which is, in the 9 range. And then we have bananas, and a lot of people eat bananas because of potassium. But if you're diabetic or you're concerned about your blood pressure or your weight, maybe that's not your best fruit. I think berries would be a better option. And here you see that bananas are nearly, when you do the math, 7 teaspoons of sugar. And then of course, raisin bran, which sounds very healthy, is more carbs than you have in soda. And if you do the math here, that's a ton of teaspoons of sugar. So again, the goal is to not have that spike. And by eating the right foods, like an egg omelet, you won't have that spike. So I just wanted to show you that again so you can understand that this is the key to not having metabolic syndrome, is to not have hyperinsulinemia. And again, when people say they have a hormone problem, they're talking about insulin. It's not their thyroid. Yes, can your thyroid cause weight problems if your thyroid is underactive? Absolutely. But for most Americans, 7% are metabolically healthy. For the 93% who aren't, is because of hyperinsulinemia. So let's talk about the best diet, right? And let's say up front, there is no best diet for anything, right? But let's talk about what the U.S. News and World Report believes are the best diet. Now, I want you to frame this part of the conversation in your brain around what I just shared. And I want to say up front, like, you learn a lot of things. Like, I'm a YouTuber, so I'm on YouTube and I'm trying to, share my podcast that way. But ultimately, always know the source, right? So, I took the time to get this extra education so that I would be a reasonably reliable source. So I say trust but verify, but at the end of the day, always, know what your sources are. So this is how they rank the best diets in terms of overall, and I'll just kind of focus on that area. And they're saying the Mediterranean overall is a great diet. And just FYI, I consider Mediterranean probably my second best diet. I love, I've been to Greece and places like that, and I love their food. And I'll explain in a moment why it's not necessarily the best diet for my diabetics. Most people are familiar with the DASH diet. I'm going to probably just focus on those two because they're so popular, and I want to kind of explain why they may not be the best diets for everybody every time. So Mediterranean diet, as you can see, people that, in places like France, Spain, Greece, Italy, all of those places have wonderful food, and they have always been regarded as a healthy diet. And I wouldn't argue at all that that's not true. But this is where I have some issues. If you look at the foundation of this Mediterranean diet, I totally agree that being physically active is important, right? And having a sense of community. In fact, when you look at the longest lived populations, that's what distinguishes them from populations that don't live as long. But if you go to the second part of the graph, you see the first thing they mention is fruit. And after hearing about the banana, you may want to pause, because I consider fruit nature's candy. Do I have a problem eating fruit? I don't have a problem at all. Do they have phytonutrients and vitamin C? 100%. But the issue is most fruits are high in sugar. And let's not talk about the juice that comes from the fruit. So if I'm a diabetic, that may not be the best place to start. Of course, non-starchy vegetables I have no problem with. The grains, however, I do have a problem with. And if I eat something like quinoa, that's going to be 40 carbs divided by 4. It's 10 teaspoons of sugar. Now, before I proceed, I want to say something that's very simple. You don't have to trust Dr. Hampton. You don't have to trust the research. All you got to do is pull out the meter And if you pull out, and it's so funny, my alarm is going off because I actually set my alarm to put on my blue blocker glasses, which I'll do after I finish, and that's to help me make melatonin at night as I get ready for sleep. So I'm trying to optimize my health in any way possible so that when I have a presentation like this at the end of the day, I still have energy to do it. So, but going back to the quinoa, it's 40 carbs divided by 4 is 10 teaspoons of sugar. So do you really need fiber from your quinoa when it has 40 carbs when you can get it from your spinach? That's what I would argue. And if you don't believe me, again, get your meter out and test your blood sugar an hour or two after you consume these grains, and you'll find that it's going to spike your sugar. And you can't keep living in this up and down space where you're just constantly spiking your insulin, because eventually the pancreas will get tired and you'll be predisposed to diabetes. They also mentioned beans and legumes. So nuts are fine. I love peanuts. You just got to be careful. They can be a little starchy. Beans can be a little starchy. In spite of the fiber, they can be a little bit of issue. So if it was me making this graph, I'd probably start with the fish and seafood as the foundation. The poultry, eggs, and cheese and yogurt, as long as the yogurt is not low fat, as the foundation, and the meats without the sweets. And so they don't really believe in meat in this Mediterranean diet. I would argue, based on that fat and protein graph that you saw earlier, that meat may be the least likely thing to raise your blood sugar and lead to metabolic syndrome. So I just wanted to put that in your head. And then I want to go to the DASH diet. As you know, the DASH diet stands for Dietary Approach to Stop Hypertension. So why do doctors and cardiologists follow this diet? Because it's considered the standard. It was designed for hypertension. What you may not know is what's highlighted. Now, I want to really pause for a moment and have you ponder this. The DASH diet is one of the most well-known diets in the world, and yet only 459 people participated in the trial. That should make you pause and say, what, Houston, we have a problem. I have probably at least twice that many patients who have done really well with my dietary. And I could, if I did my own study, I would have more people in my practice, let alone this. So the first problem with this study is it's not big enough, which is, it just doesn't make sense. I just can't believe that part. But let's go beyond that. Let's talk about what they recommend. Now let's go back to that graph where you're thinking about the carbs, protein, and fat. So do you really think a diabetic should consume 6 to 8 servings of grains per day? Is there anything on this graph that you think won't raise their blood sugar? And by the way, that bread and that pasta is just flour. Is that even food? That's not even real food. When people say eat a whole foods diet, it either ran, swam, or flew, so it was an animal, or it grew in the ground. It wasn't something highly processed. They want you to do, if you do 6 to 8 servings of grains every day, you will never get off of medicine. And that's a guarantee coming from my mouth. And I'm glad you did the disclosure at the beginning, Dr. Collins, because it's just my experience, but it's supported by research. And the other part is 4 to 5 servings per day of fruits and vegetables. Now, I'm assuming they mean, 4 of each, but maybe it's just 1 of each. It doesn't really matter. But if you look at the fruit as a general theme, I don't really see berries on this image, but at the end of the day, if it's not berries, it's probably going to raise your sugar. If it's grapefruit, it works. If it's lemons, it works. Problem with grapefruit, as you know, it's hard to take that when you're on medicine. 6 or less servings per day of lean protein. I do agree that we need protein. And I would never recommend you get low-fat anything, because low-fat dairy or any other low-fat product means they have to increase the sugar, because again, you only have protein, fat, and carbs. So if you decrease one of those macronutrients, you have to. So I would advise anybody watching, do not buy low-fat products, because they are high sugar products. And of course, I have no problem with fat. I have problems with sweets. So let's go to the next slide. And again, your meter will give you all of this information. So let's go to the diet that I tend to favor, which is this high-fat, low-carb diet. And look where they rank that. So Mediterranean is ranked number 1, and the low-carb keto diet is ranked number 37, right? So, but I want you to notice something. This expert reviewer who was part of the panel said, the diet is excessively high in saturated fat, right? Now, we've been told for decades that saturated fat is harmful. So I want you to keep that in mind, and I think that's the main reason that they are saying things that are not positive about that diet. But I just want to say this before I go on. The American Heart Association in March of 2022 endorsed low carb and keto. The American Diabetes Association at the end of 2019 endorsed low carb and keto. Ms. Brown, who was the previous CEO of the American Diabetes, got off her insulin doing low carb. The Association of Clinical Endocrinology in 2016 endorsed low carb. So you don't have to really be nervous about that anymore, because they finally recognized that based on the evidence, not based on expert opinion, that that's okay. So here's what I want to show, because I know I got some clinicians here, and I also have people who will go see their doctor and say, Dr. Hampton's a quack, right? Well, let's look at what the Journal of the American College of Cardiology says about saturated fat and things like that. So let's look at what they say. This is the highlights of the report. So the current guidelines do say do less than 10% of your calories from saturated fat, right, to reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease. But if you look at what they reported out, after they looked at randomized controlled trials, high quality studies, there's no robust evidence that the current population-wide arbitrary upper limits of saturated fat consumption in the US will prevent cardiovascular disease. And translated another way, there's no need to reduce saturated fat in your diet. But I guarantee you, if you talk to the average clinician, they have not gotten this memo, and they have not changed how they practice medicine based on this memo. So that's why you continue to get these mixed messages. The doctors do not have time to read studies. I spent 2 years in nutrition school. I had a whole class, forcing me to learn how to read nutrition studies. And at the end of the day, they just don't have the information yet. So they're not trying to harm you. They just don't have the information. And this shouldn't surprise you that the recommendation to limit saturated fat has persisted despite evidence to the contrary. So this is in the same document that reported this out. And whole fat dairy, meat, eggs, dark chocolate, and foods that are rich in saturated fat don't increase the risk for cardiovascular disease. And it's just no need to reach. So again, this is, if you're hearing this for the first time, I don't expect you to just leave here and go get a ribeye. But what I want you to do is you need to just, all you got to do is search College of Cardiology position statement on fat. It'll be in black and white. It's very clear. And again, it was based on looking at the evidence as a true scientist and removing some of those studies that were poorly done. Here's another study that shows that cardiovascular disease risk response for type 2 diabetics in a clinical setting. And what happened, and this is a non-randomized control study. So it's a study where they didn't randomize to the degree we'd like, but it's better quality than an observational survey study. And what they found is that glycemic control and type 2 diabetes can improve with nutritional ketosis. That's what they wanted to kind of find out. If you're in a low carb or keto diet, is that going to help? And what they found is that most of the biomarkers, the things that we measure like insulin level and your blood pressure and your blood sugar, all of those things improve. And here's the other reason why I think that the US NEW may have been hesitant, because the LDL cholesterol can be the same or increase a little bit in a low carb or keto diet. And doctors are obsessed with LDL cholesterol. However, if you only measure, if you don't look at the particle sizes and you don't measure the large and small particles, your LDL cholesterol has no value, because your LDL can be high because you have a lot of the large particles which bounce off your arteries as opposed to the small arteries. Another test that is very helpful is an apolipoprotein beta A ratio. Your doctor can order that, and those tests are better predictors of heart disease than the LDL or total cholesterol. And then here's another study here that I want to just highlight, looking at risk for heart disease. So here's what I see when I look at these studies. Number one, the low carb or keto diet does reduce weight, whether you're diabetic or not. Of course, it's going to reduce your blood sugar. Your triglycerides, which is part of the metabolic syndrome, are going to go down. In fact, I determine if a person is following this diet based on their triglycerides. If it goes down and the good cholesterol, the HDL go up, I know they're following the dietary. But you can see where doctors get nervous because they're saying the LDL can go up or not change, right? So it's mixed results, but they believe that's because of the increased saturated fat. But again, I want you to understand what cholesterol LDL is. LDL is like the mortar for your house. It's the tuck point, right? Now, you don't want to have too much mortar because you'll plaster a brick house. And you need the good cholesterol to bring away the extra mortar as it falls to the ground. So because you imagine if you have inflammation, it'll plaster and stucco a brick house. The key is, why do you have inflammation? And the answer is because of the starchy, sugary foods. So if you remove the inflammation from the starchy, sugary foods, then the cholesterol normalizes in most cases. So again, do we care about saturated fat? I just showed you that. So even though it increases saturated fat and total fat, I just showed you that we don't care about that anymore. They're concerned about animal protein. I don't care about animal protein. And then in terms of cardioprotective foods, they say it decreases. Well, they're saying it's low in fruit. I just shared with you, I don't care about fruit. It's low in grains. Well, I don't care about grains. See what I'm saying? So the problem with the current model is that they're focused on something that doesn't add value. And that's why a lot of clinicians are not focused on the right thing. And I think the one thing I want to say is, would you prefer to see a clinician who is healing people and reversing disease versus those who say, just take the medicine and just kind of, just manage it? And I would prefer to be with a clinician that's going to help me do better with that. This statement is just comparing larger and smaller particle LDLs. And again, it's just reminding us that most clinicians are focused on LDL, but they should be focused on, is there large or small particles? So when you talk to your doctor, ask them to order LDL particle sizes or ApoB ratio test, and that'll give you a better prediction of your risk for heart disease. The best test, by the way, is a coronary artery calcium score at Advocate Aurora in Chicago, where I work. That test costs $49, and it'll determine if you have plaques or not, which is way better than all these indirect tests. So I do want to comment, because we're talking about, which diet is best. Let's look at where people live the longest. So if you notice, it's pretty close, but Hong Kong lives the longest. And you could definitely argue that in Japan and Spain and France, they tend to be a little bit more blue zone plant-based, right? But the question is, what about Hong Kong, right? Well, in Hong Kong, they eat more meat per capita than any other city in the world. They live the longest, and they eat the equivalent of 2 10-ounce steaks every single day per person. The point of this slide is not to tell you to eat a 10-ounce steak, because the blue zones will keep you alive as well, eating more plant-based. The goal is to stop demonizing people who eat steaks, because clearly, if the longest lived city on the planet is Hong Kong and they eat a lot of meat, it's not about the meat. It's about other factors: access to healthcare, having a sense of community, taking time to have a break from work, laughing, eating real food instead of fake food, which is the processed food, and many other factors, walking a lot, being outdoors. Those are the factors that lead to longevity. So for those who are vegan, have at it. Make sure you take your supplements. Those who are carnivore, have at it. We do need more studies on carnivore that are randomized controlled trials, but the initial observational studies are extremely favorable. So as we get close to wrap up, I want to share with you. So when you go to my Linktree, Dr. Tony Hampton Linktree, you'll see this hand. This is what I give patients. Most patients that I see only need a handout and encouragement. And I'll say to them, I need you to eat protein and non-starchy vegetables. That's where I live. Today I had a half a chicken from Sam's. It was roasted, of course, no flour because that's starch. I don't put flour, cornmeal, or barbecue sauce on my meat. That's all I had so far. I'm sitting before you. In the air fryer will be some ribeye, and I'm eating some ribeye and maybe some string beans tonight. What I'm trying to suggest is that if I'm diabetic, the chicken's not going to raise my sugar, the ribeye not going to raise my sugar, and the green beans are like 4 carbs. So essentially, I'm going to have 4 carbs all day, and I'm not even hungry as we speak. I'm only eating because it's time to eat, and I don't want to disappear. As you can see, there's fats on this image. And the fats, I use bokeh, butter, olive oil, coconut oil, avocado oil, just as an easy reminder. When I think about the butter, on the olive oil, I think about low temperature cooking or just, on your salad. When I think about high temperature, I think about the C and the bokeh, the coconut and the avocado oil. They can handle the high temperatures. I like fermented foods. I think probiotics are great. You're going to probably have to supplement to get the real good probiotics. But having said that, fermented foods are good. And of course, the herbs. And if it's fruit, we're going to focus on berries. If we're on medicines, we're not going to do grapefruit. If we're not on medicines, we can do grapefruit, and the Granny Smith apple, not necessarily your favorite, is low in sugar with the lemons and the limes. Nuts and seeds are fine. You need to be careful because most people, they're very addictive. So you have to limit the nuts and seeds, but they are awesome other than that. Again, you can have some of the starch of your vegetables, but you got to limit it. And these are just kind of arbitrary parameters that I've made up. But at the end of the day, fruit is nature's candy, and you need to be careful with that. When it comes to things to avoid, you want to avoid dried fruit because that's nothing but like raisins and craisins. It's just sugar. Literally a little boxes of raisin is just nothing but sugar. And when you look at the little box of raisins, you'll see a ton of carbs. We mentioned quinoa. Beans are okay, but you got to be careful. So if you're really if you look up beans, it'll probably be 40 carbs. So I would be careful with that. Rice, we've already shared what that does. Most cereals are just highly processed food. I don't care if it says high fiber, whatever. It's just processed grains. Pasta is flour, and potatoes are important. A lot of water, tea, and coffee without sugar. I like stevia and I like monk fruit. So that's kind of the general rule. Animals, non-starchy vegetables, and try to get full off the protein as much as possible. You'll never see a fat lion. You'll never see a fat tiger. You will absolutely see a fat ape. You'll see a fat elephant. You'll see a fat cow, and they graze on carbs all day. That's why they're fat. When we try to fatten a cow at the end of their life, we give them grains. If I want a duck to have a fatty liver, I give it, I open his mouth and I stuff it with corn. It's those types of things that will also make you have a fatty liver. And a fatty liver is the disaster when it comes to your metabolic health. So I think it's really important as we wrap up and open up to questions that everybody who is checking this out, this is not an indoctrination. This is not preaching to folk. What this is opening your eyes to the reality that most clinicians are not trained on nutrition. Most clinicians have your best interests in mind, but they have to follow dietary guidelines which do not serve you. And I wrote an op-ed in Chicago Tribune to remind people that the dietary guidelines are actually designed for healthy people. Well, I just shared with you only 7% are healthy. So 93% of the people who are following dietary guidelines are following something that wasn't designed for them. So think about that. And clearly, based on what I've shared tonight, you can see why it's not designed for them. And I would argue for the 7% who are metabolically healthy, they need to be cautious as well. And if they eat the number of grains that's recommended, they will find that they will end up in a metabolic dysfunctional state. So I'll wrap up with that and open up to any questions you guys have. I definitely enjoyed being part of this conversation. Again, it's a lot to hear, it's a lot to swallow, but this is my passion. And I'll give you one example and I'll wrap up. So I'm the medical director for the mobile health team for Advocate Aurora. And so we go around and we, do things in mobile van. One of the members of the team who I hadn't seen for a while shared at the end of our meeting that she had gone to one of our healthy living events maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And since she went to that event and made these changes, she's lost 185 pounds. These are the types of testimonials that you hear over and over again. Having the right information and maybe a little motivation and coaching and mentoring will help so many of our friends and family heal, even the people you're not expecting to get the message. So I'll wrap up with that, Dr. Collins. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Hampton. You helped me prove there is power in knowledge and really the benefit of knowing what you need to know. Everything that somebody tells you is not truth. So thank you for that. You have a lot of questions. I'm going to start from the bottom and work my way back to the top, and we will answer all the questions that we can answer between now and 7:30. So Dr. Hampton can go have his ribeye. What are your thoughts on protein powders and collagen?
Yes, I love collagen, by the way, because collagen typically is going to be coming from bone. It's great for your skin. It's great for healing because most of the ligaments and tendons in your skin is primarily protein from collagen. You always tell people to always eat the ribeye first, right? But if you're saying for convenience, what do I keep? I keep Keto Chow electrolyte powder, just a brand that I'm familiar with because they sponsor a lot of the events that I go to because they don't have a lot of carbs. So if you use any type of protein powder, I don't even care if it's whey from dairy, you just have to make sure you can tolerate it. Make sure the carbs are low. Some of the powders that taste okay, they may add Splenda. That's an artificial sweetener, but it's still better than sugar. So I think as a general rule, let me give you an example of what I mean. So if I eat a protein bar, not even a powder, it's going to be probably about $1.50 to $2, right? If I eat, and that's going to be 20 carbs on average for most, 20 protein. If I eat 3 boiled eggs, it's going to be 18. And I can get a whole carton of eggs for much cheaper. So for my patients who I serve, I think money first. It's nothing magical in these products. Try to eat real food, but if it's a convenience issue, absolutely use those protein powders that are low in carbs.
Thank you, sir. What are your thoughts on the role of carbohydrates in individuals who train strenuously and are adhering to a ketogenic diet?
Absolutely. It's a mixed world out there when it comes to that. Professor Tim Noakes wrote books about how you have to carb load and all of that good stuff. He's in South Africa, and he had to kind of retract some of his recommendations because he found himself becoming borderline diabetic. So the rule of thumb is when you're young and active and very athletic, you can tolerate way more carbs. But the key is to understand where you fit on that spectrum. So I would ask anybody who's an athlete that wants to carb load to kind of get a feel for their insulin level. And if their insulin level is in a pretty good spot, that buys them more time. Ultimately, when it comes to long-term use of that method, it may be damaging because you keep spiking, right? And that spiking that I mentioned earlier can be damaging. The other issue with that is if you're relying on ketones as your fuel, when you first develop the habit of learning how to be keto adaptive and you're learning how to burn fuel, you may be less efficient as an athlete in the beginning, but once you become keto adaptive, you should do just fine. So unless you're a world-class athlete, none of this stuff matters. You should be able to do a keto diet or a low-carb diet and not have to carb load to get the job done.
Thank you. Do you have any dietary recommendations for women with PCOS?
Yeah, well, everything I just said. If on that metabolic syndrome slide, you did see PCOS. So it's all about inflammation, and our ovaries get very irritated and inflamed because of those insulin spikes. So it's actually a low carb diet easily. People see what we do in medicine. We give antidotes. And I'll be honest, metformin is a better drug than most because it does reduce insulin resistance. It doesn't cause insulin spikes. It does reduce the production of extra glucose from your liver. However, a better approach is to avoid the poison. So if the poison is the spikes from the carbs, just avoid the poison. You almost are guaranteed to reverse polycystic ovarian disease, and particularly because most of the patients are younger. Now, this is what people don't know. I did a podcast with Dr. Salcedo, so the person who's asking this question should search my name and Dr. Salcedo on YouTube, Salcedo. She's a gynecologist in San Diego, and we did an entire podcast talking about the connection between metabolic syndrome and gynecological conditions. And what she found is it's not just polycystic. The person who had polycystic is going to end up with fibroids. The person with fibroids is going to end up with uterine cancer. It's all the same disease. It's inflammation over time that leads to, don't forget, insulin is the fat storage hormone and the most important hormone in the body when it comes to growth. So if you keep spiking insulin, things are going to grow. Things are going to become inflamed, and your risk for cancer and fibroids and polycystic will be greater. So when you see cysts in the body, most people with cysts tend to have an insulin resistance problem, whether it's in the ovaries or in other parts of the body.
Perfect. The next question, how does a patient know they're in ketosis?
Wow. Well, they do have another sponsor of some of these events I go to is Keto Mojo, but you can actually measure the ketones in your breath, in your blood, and in your urine. You're probably going to do, you need to understand though, that when you are not keto adapted, which takes a couple of weeks, you may spill ketones in your urine because your body, it's like turning a car that's gas, and then you say, I'm gonna do the electric. I haven't used the electric. Your car is like, I don't know how to do that. So when you start eating a high-fat, low-carb diet, your body is not used to burning belly fat for fuel. So for the first few weeks, you have to become adaptive to that fuel source. So you'll spill ketones in your urine, which is why you also have to be careful with things like gout, because you also spill uric acid in the urine, and therefore you want to maybe take a little bit more medicine or ease into this diet so that you won't have the uric acid will not win the war with the ketones. You're going to spill the ketones before the uric acid, which allows it to build up, increasing your risk for a gout attack or a kidney stone. So we have to ease people into that, and we also have to make sure that we take medicine sometimes in that state. So at the end of the day, you can check your urine in the beginning, but once you become keto adaptive, you have to do a blood test, which is why I mentioned Keto Mojo and or a breath test. It ends up being a blood test. Most people are not going to purchase a breath test, which is a pretty good test as well. So that's how I would judge it. People who, people feel really good when they're in ketosis. They have mental clarity and energy, et cetera. But I think the tests are the best way to do it.
Perfect. Thank you.
But it's not necessary.
Right.
None of my patients measure ketones. It's not. It's only if you're curious. You're more like us doctors who want to know everything. But you just get your carbs under 50 a day, and I would argue 20 for some people. I wouldn't even bother doing all of that if you don't have to.
Okay. Can you tell me how many milligrams are in a teaspoon of salt?
Yes, it's basically 5. So it's just 5. So going back to that thing I said earlier, imagine only that amount that your body can tolerate in, like, I think it's 5 liters of blood. So that's all it is, but that's basically what it is. So a teaspoon is 5 milligrams. A tablespoon should be about 15.
Okay. What are your thoughts on supplements?
If you're vegan, I just saw a patient last week, and people are trying to do their best, right? And I was like, she was having hair loss, she was tired, she was having all kinds of stomach problems, headaches, and my brain was like, I bet you're deficient. So I do the labs. Vegans need to think about zinc. They need to think about magnesium. They need to think about vitamin B12. So there are just some things that you're not getting B12 from plants, period. And you're not going to get a sufficient amount of some other mineral. So if you're vegan, I would get a good vegan supplement, make sure it's got B12. Now, if you're on the other end of the spectrum, you tend to not need, so I'm talking about all the way to carnivore, you tend not to need supplements. Now, another thing I want to mention about vegan is definitely the omega-3. You need to get the omega-3. So for this patient, I convinced her to become pescatarian for a while, because when I checked her labs, it all checked out. Vitamin D is important, but for me personally, as a kind of a ketovore, meaning I don't eat a lot of vegetables, but I do eat vegetables. I tend to do vitamin D3 with K2. Vitamin K2 is like the usher who will transport the calcium that's being absorbed better by the vitamin D from your joints, from your arteries into your bone, because you don't want to have arthritis and or clogged arteries because of too much calcium. So vitamin D3 with K2. K2 is kind of a new thing, but again, this is the stuff you learn when you get extra training in nutrition. High potency omega-3, I'm not convinced that it's great for your heart necessarily, but I do think high potency omega-3 is a good idea, particularly when you have concerns around dementia. It's really important to supplement with that. So that's something you want to think about. But most multivitamins are not going to show a lot of evidence to support it. If you do a multivitamin, I would try to get a food-based multivitamin. But that's kind of where I stop. I do vitamin D, omega-3, and that. Now, I did a podcast with Natasha Trenev, who is the mother of probiotics. And you could argue for some people, probiotics are a good idea because it's hard to get the adequate microbiome for your gut. I do it only because I used to have an irritable bowel problem. When I stopped the probiotics, I'm okay because low carb works for my belly, but I tend to do it as like an insurance policy because I don't want to go back to those stomach aching days.
A question just came in. I think you can sort of add on to what you just said. So the question came as the importance of probiotics.
Yes, that's ironically, right? So I definitely would encourage people. I did 2 interviews with Natasha Trenev. She's part of ProTrend. So I think the first episode, she said, if you mention my name, I don't have an affiliate with her, but they would give you like a discount. At the end of the day, I think the quality of the probiotic matters. The capsule needs to be very solid because the acid in your stomach, probiotics are proteins, and your acid in your stomach is primarily to break down proteins, but you want that probiotic to get into your small and large intestines. So you want to get a good company. I actually made a video with her. There was a very viral YouTube video. Auntie is how she called herself. She went to Walmart. She brought a probiotic, and she said, a year later, she lost 100 pounds. Is there, that would be kind of hard to believe. And Natasha Trenev basically said that it's probably more placebo. Does probiotics help you? Absolutely. But the quality matters. So just do a little research on the quality that you get. It doesn't matter if it's powder or a capsule with like a gel in it. It just needs to be from a reputable company, which, does a good job. But the podcast kind of talks in more detail about how to adjust that.
What about prebiotics?
And we talked about that too. And so prebiotics feed the probiotics, and that's when you start thinking about certain types of foods, fibers, and things like that. Her recommendation, and I don't disagree with this, I've never taken prebiotics, is that you try to eat the foods that would feed the bacteria, because if you give too many prebiotics, you may be feeding the bad bacteria as well. So that's just her recommendation. I've always followed that recommendation, not knowing it was a good idea, but that was her recommendation. Now, again, when I say mother of probiotics, literally her family had a yogurt company, and she is the person who literally invented probiotics. So when it goes back to what we said earlier, not that makes her the expert and know-it-all, but you got to be careful. And I think when you're trying to learn something from people, try to get the highest level of expertise you can find. And the person who invented it, that's reasonably safe. And she does do research as well.
Before we leave supplements, what about folic acid?
Yeah, well, clearly if, my patients tend to be older now, over 18. Obviously I do have young adults, but before I joined Advocate Aurora, I was, delivering babies like every 8 day, it felt like. Folic acid is definitely important. So if you don't want to be anemic, it's important because it's part of the process of, with hemoglobin production. But it's also important for, other reasons, but pregnancy is when I really worry about it. So if a person is, thinking about conceiving at those childbearing ages, I would absolutely consume folic acid. What I do I think everybody needs to consume folic acid? No. If I had to target a population to be those childbearing ages and just women in general because of the menstrual cycles.
What are your thoughts on lumen? Your thoughts on lumen, Lumen?
I don't know if I can answer that. Do I not know what that is? I mean, I may not know that. One thing I learned a long time ago is I don't think I know that one. So I'm gonna have to do more research on that one.
And there's a link in the chat from Dr. Taylor.
Oh, is it? Okay, cool.
Yeah, so we'll come back to that.
Yes.
How much exercise is too much exercise?
Well, I'm blessed in that I exercise twice a week for 15 minutes. And that's it. So I use Dr. Ben Bokikio's program with exercise bands. Everything's done very slowly. It sounds crazy, but this body I have is 15 minutes twice a week, high intensity, each exercise less than a minute and a half. The recommendations have been that you do 150 minutes a week. That is not a bad recommendation. But you got to be careful not to overuse your muscles. So I think when you get past an hour, you're really, it's not going to add a lot of value. Why do the high intensity exercise? It doesn't have to be this, but why does that work? Because when you take muscles to failure or exhaustion, those muscles are basically done. You've already shredded them, wherever your micro tears. So you want to let the muscle heal, recover, and grow. Anything beyond that doesn't add value, and too much exercise. So if you go, if you start getting into over an hour, and I'm not talking about the sauna and the other things you can do at a gym, you get to a point where it becomes stressful. So I've actually had patients who over exercise, and I have to tell them, hey, you don't have to exercise 6 days a week. I need you to take 3 days or 2 days off, because if you don't heal, recover, and grow muscle, you're not going to gain muscle. So if a person's doing it for muscle, you have to let the muscle rest so it can heal, recover, and grow. And so that's what the research shows. So I think in general, don't go past an hour, but less is more, particularly for us folk that's over 50. We need to have recovery. I'm ashamed to say that. We need recovery in order to be, to heal really well.
Is carb addiction real?
I think so. Another person you may want to, in fact, it's so funny you bring that up. I'll be doing some research with Dr. Joan Iflin. If you search Dr. Joan Iflin and Dr. Hampton on YouTube, and that's IFLAND, she is the founder of, she wrote the book on processed food addiction. And they have it's such an addiction that her reset community, art community, has 14 hours of Zoom meetings every day, just like a AAA. So if you're struggling, you have to pay $50 a month, but it's really a great resource. So Dr. Robert Cyrus is the carb addiction doc, and I would find his YouTube channel as well. So for anybody who's struggling with addictions, I would use those two resources and I do have a link in my link tree to some questions you can ask yourself. It's the same 11 questions you ask a person who has an alcohol addiction. And if you're answering yes to a lot of those questions, you may want to submit your answers and just ask them, what resources do they have? So do I think it's real? 100%.
Thank you. As we close out, can you talk about the importance of stress, sleep, and dealing with trauma?
When I started my Protecting Your Nest podcast, that acronym spoke to all of those points. So of course we talked about nutrition. I'm okay with intermittent fasting. The exercise is important, not for weight loss, but for weight loss maintenance and to help you achieve metabolic health. You just don't want to overdo it, as we've discussed. Stress and lack of sleep both lead to increased cortisol production. I do want my cortisol to be high in the morning, but because it helps with my sleep cycle. And I put a bright light in front of me in the morning when I'm in my office just to increase my cortisol. But cortisol will then tell your liver to release sugar. So if you're under stress, not getting enough sleep, you will have a high blood sugar. University of Chicago, University of Wisconsin, and a few other institutions have done studies. They've shown that if you don't get enough sleep if it's like 4 to 5 hours, you become borderline diabetic in most cases within a week. You can reverse it just as quickly by getting your 7 hours. It can be 6 to 7, 8 hours, depending on the person. And they also found that your blood pressure would be high for 12 hours if you don't get enough sleep for the next day. So if you are sleep deprived when you see your doctor, expect it to be elevated. Advocate Aurora has a trauma recovery center. If you had trauma in your life, whether as a kid or as an adult, that if you don't deal with that trauma, you're going to still have a high blood pressure and a blood sugar. And then your thoughts, I did a whole podcast. I recommend podcast episode number 14. Then it's entitled, How We Think. I've had people literally come to me and say that podcast episode really helped them to reframe their thoughts. There's a bodyguard that keeps the negative thoughts from entering my mind. And that bodyguard will then let the good thoughts come in. And if you have, just imagine today I talked about wellness with the second highest ranking person for Advocate just today. It was a busy day. In order to do that with confidence and not have self-limiting thinking, you got to feed your brain constantly. So I listen to Anthony Robbins and I listen to the hip hop preacher, Eric Thomas. I listen to Les Brown, whoever. I listen to Will Smith, even though he made a mistake. I listen to, Kevin Hart. All of these guys have inspirational things to share, and I fill my brain with that. If I'm sad, I listen to Pharrell. I just want to be happy. I listen, and you'd be surprised how a song like that and words like that will change how you think. And that's what allows me to do a million things I'm doing and do it without feeling stressed. You have no idea how your life will change if you get your thoughts together, you start to focus on wellness, you start moving your body, you stay away from toxic people, you get out of dysfunctional relationships, you get a therapist or a life coach when you're in a relationship. All of these things are the things that help you to heal. And I promise I'm a flawed man. I'm not perfect, but I am so much better because I've been through some struggles. I've gotten through some struggles, and now I'm just like killing it. And I'm like, wow, so glad I went through a few struggles, right? Struggles will make you stronger. So I really appreciate that question, Doc.
Thank you so much, sir. Absolutely fantastic presentation. The audience thanks you. If you could put the HIT workout that you mentioned in the chat, because I think many are interested in that, that would be great. Thank you all very much for attending this evening. I hope everybody got at least if you are not a routine attender of my webinars, please in the chat. I'll be happy. But everybody stay safe. We are in the midst of our triple pandemic right now of the flu, RSV, and COVID. If you have not been boosted, please get boosted. If you have not had your flu shot, please get your flu shot. And if you have children, make sure they're not at risk for HSV. So again, thank you all very much and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you.